Hi, welcome to CrimeSphere, your #1 channel for unraveling the mysteries of the criminal underworld, dissecting the psychology of lawbreakers, and exploring the darker corners of our world. If you love gripping stories, intriguing investigations, and the raw truth about crime, you're in the right place. Today, we're diving into a subject shrouded in secrecy and myth, the dark web. This shadowy digital underworld has earned a reputation as a haven for criminals. But is it really as sinister as it seems? Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll know what truly lurks in the depths of the internet, and it might just shock you. Much has been made of the dark web, its dangerous, its illicit offerings, and its disturbing users. And today, we're going to be scratching the surface of its depths to separate reality from fiction and give you a peek at the foundations in which this apparent haven for the depraved is built. Here are some of the criminal acts from the dark web. Though it's sad to say, poverty is a plague that will forever exist, whether it be the current financial crisis, the effects of war, or any number of other factors. There will always be the haves and have-nots. There's little most of us can do in the grand scheme of things, and those who do have the wealth and influence to spark a sweeping change would never want to change the system that brings them fortune. It's admirable, then, that in the face of a titanic problem, that there are those who dedicate themselves to making whatever difference they can. We're talking about foreign volunteers who trade the comforts of home for some of the planet's poorest regions in order to aid people in need, and a common destination for those who want to do their part. Is India home to the largest population on Earth? It's also a country with extreme wealth inequality, where there is a stark divide between those who thrive and those who struggle just to survive. In the latter group, none are as vulnerable as the over 18 million kids who have been left to fend for themselves in the nation's streets. They're helpless and rely on the kindness of others. So while the impact of volunteer work might appear statistically small, it's enormous for the children who receive support. Those who would upend their lives for the sake of them are considered among the best of us, although at times the reality can be much darker. And this is Matthew Smith, a school teacher and philanthropist whose motives were not as pure as they appeared in 2007 at the age of 24. Smith uprooted from the UK and traveled to Chennai. On the surface, his reasons seem virtuous. Between 2009 and 2014, he volunteered for nonprofit organizations and worked in several orphanages in the country. For context, the vast majority of India's abandoned youth are without documentation, which makes them effectively invisible in anything but the smallest scale. As a result, the easy targets for those with ill intentions, as there are few who'd ever know of the crimes committed against them, and even fewer who actually care. Little was known about Smith's interactions with the orphans. He claimed to safeguard the information that came to light much later made the exploitation of at least one child in his care an undeniable fact. The evidence showed him bathing naked and engaging inappropriately with a minor. After his 7 years in India, Smith then found a job teaching in Nepal, and as far as we were aware, there is no evidence that he committed crimes against the children he taught there. Whether this is because he managed to hide them or because he genuinely left the students alone, we will never really know. In either case, we will soon see that Smith had an alternative way to satisfy his dark desires. He moved back to the UK in July 2022, and to true form, continued to ensure that he was always surrounded by children. In September that same year, Smith began working at Thomas's Battersea, a London private school that costs over £20,000 a year to attend. Perhaps his most famous student was Prince George, who is presently second in line to inherit the British throne. Smith had two roles at Thomas's Battersea. He was the deputy head teacher and, perhaps even worse, the head of pastoral care, the part of the school intended to ensure the physical and emotional well-being of students there. He didn't draw a hint of suspicion, but behind the scenes, law enforcement was onto him, as they had gotten word that he'd been showering abuse materials on the dark web. Now, the dark web's infamy stems in no small part from its connection to illegal predatory imagery, which is no surprise given its focus on privacy. The Tor browser affords tech-minded users an unmatched degree of anonymity, provided that they know what they're doing and where there's anonymity, there will always be people like Matthew Smith, ready to expose their darkest traits. Unfortunately for him, somewhere along the line, he'd slipped up. You see, dark web investigations are shrouded in secrecy, so typically you don't actually hear much about the process, because if you did, then criminals would know how to disguise their footprints, and this story was no exception. Investigators at the National Crime Agency gave no indication of what had tipped them off. Whatever they had on Smith, it was strong enough that they were clear to arrest him in November 2022. When police raided his home in Chesterfield Grove, southeast London, the suspect was kind enough to leave the wealth of evidence in plain sight. You see, he left his black Dell laptop open with dark web forums and sites dedicated to indecent images of children occupying several tabs. He'd also left the desktop version of Telegram locked in, and this would further expose his shameful secrets. You see, upon examination of the app, investigators found conversations chronicling 5 years of interactions between Smith and 2 teenagers back in India. He'd been engaged in conversation with one of them at the moment he was taken into custody, and it turned out that during and after his time in Nepal, Smith was paying these boys to act as his proxies. He'd make specific requests, send them illegal content as examples, and give them advice on how to build a child's trust. The teens would then target vulnerable children, recreate the examples they were shown, send them the results, and receive payment for their services. A detail often overlooked is that one of these teenagers seems to be former victims of Smith's, likely the child the police found evidence of him bathing with. As prosecutor Martin Hooper indicated during the legal process, quote, "When the boy was older, Smith referred to his uncle, encouraged him to lure an 8-year-old boy away from his family with the express intention that he would be sexually abused. The defendant said he would pay the school fees in return, so over half a decade, the teacher had spent in excess of £65,000 commissioning abuse material. During the investigation, 120,000 indecent images of children were recovered from his electronic devices, around 11,000 of which were Category A. Those dark web tabs he'd left open also demonstrated that he wasn't alone, and there's a common requirement for entry into that broader community: the contribution of original content. With that in mind, there's no telling how far the results of his offenses may have spread. On the 9th of August, 2023, Matthew Smith was then sentenced to 12 years in prison at Southwark Crown Court. He was added to the sex offenders register for life and is subject to an indefinite sexual harm prevention order. When asked if he'd commit any crimes against the students attending the London private school, Smith was adamant that he hadn't. When asked if he'd abused any children in other schools he worked at, he declined to answer. Anyone with a passing interest in the dark web has heard of the disturbing services available, provided you have the crypto to pay for them, from hiring a hacker to playing director in a murderer's red room. Many believe you can buy almost anything, and different levels of truth exist within the whispers, making it challenging to discern the boundary between urban legends and reality. But a troubling surface that's long been associated with the dark web is murder for hire. But can you legitimately hire an assassin with a few mouse clicks? While a surprising number of people decide to find out for themselves. And this brings us to Deanna Mary Stinson, a Florida resident in her 50s. When we think of assassination, Stinson certainly isn't the image we have in our minds. She was an entrepreneur and a director of finance at a church in New Tampa, but as it turns out, envy is a very powerful thing, and Stinson's intentions turned dark in the summer of 2021, and the subject of her anger was none other than the wife of her ex-boyfriend. Precisely where this hatred came from, we have no real idea, but what we do know is that the married couple were regulars at Stinson's church, so she'd often see her target with her former boyfriend. She wanted them gone out of her life. And to do this, she went a tour where she found it was shockingly easy to find someone offering to kill for a fee. So on June 24th, she created an account on her site, declaring itself the #1 hitman marketplace. It had a handy price list for potential customers. Death by beating would set them back a minimum of $2,000. A shooting at least $5,000, and employing a sniper would cost $20. Plus, the rates must have seemed reasonable to Stinson, as the following day, she posted on the site's public forum requesting a quick hit in southern Florida. Now, when you're trying to purchase the services of a killer, there's a specific process that must be followed. So she gave the murder for hire agency her target's personal information and attached the picture of her to make identification simple. It's also crucial that a customer proves they have the Bitcoin for this. Only after this is transferred will a gang member be assigned to the job. Now, Stinson had a couple of additional stipulations for her gangster for hire. One, that the murder didn't take place when the victim was home, and that the target died in July, ideally between the 5th and the 11th. With her order in, she was eager to see the results. Her preferred date came and went, but the target was still breathing. There'd been a problem, but it was nothing another Bitcoin transaction can solve. Or perhaps it was, as there was another issue, then a third, and so on. Stinson would make 5 payments to the site and pursuits of petty revenge, only to have been assigned a hitman with incredibly poor luck. Unhappy with the service she'd received thus far, Stinson demanded they have someone with a proven record carry out the hits. Having forked over $12,000 worth of crypto, she seemed no closer to having anyone killed, which at minimum warrant a passive-aggressive Yelp review. Fortunately, she would soon be contacted by someone capable of getting the job done. Unfortunately, this was an FBI agent, and his assignment was to arrest her once again. How this came to be was kept vague, with reports stating the FBI were alerted about Stinson, but no further details. In this instance, there were a couple of possibilities. Option 1 is that those running the site send word to law enforcement, which has happened on at least one occasion with a murder-for-hire site. But option 2 was that the site was actually being run by the feds. Now, this is all too common to happen on the dark web, which usually follows from a silent seizure of domains involved in criminal activity. In either case, the investigators needed airtight evidence of Stinson's guilt, so they acquired it in an interesting fashion. An agent posing as the assassin, sent to make good on the deal, texted Stinson to introduce himself in a recorded phone call. Soon after they discussed the details, the client reassured the fake hitman that she wanted the murder to go ahead. Naturally, this necessitated another payment, and the agent would require $350 to buy a revolver. Somehow, a professional killer reported for duty, completely unarmed, didn't ring any alarm bells, so Stinson agreed. Initially, the agent asked for a Western Union Bank transfer, but this wasn't her first rodeo. She knew that would be traceable, so instead, she insisted the payment be made via crypto to ensure her security. When the agent agreed, she hopped over to her Coinbase wallet. Yes, the same Coinbase that requires passport-level ID to sign up for, and was arrested soon after. The arrest took place on September 22, 2021, and Stinson pleaded guilty to one murder-for-hire charge the following year on January 19th. A few months later, she was sentenced. She is currently serving 6.5 years for her crime, and will be subject to 3 years of supervision post-release, and has been forced to shell out another $12,000, this time in restitution. And it could have all been avoided if, instead of seeking a hitman, she'd researched the dark web assassination business itself. If she'd done so, she'd have known the total number of confirmed hits by the dark web assassins currently stands at 0, thanks to dark web markets like Silk Road, Alphabay, and others. The criminal activity of the dark web is especially famous for is the sale of illicit substances. While the markets themselves are often discussed, the systems that prop them up are rarely considered. And that's why, in our last segment here, we're going to be covering exactly that. This is the story of the man who some call the Lord of the Dark Web. Born in 1959, Herman Johan Vervoort Dirksen was an unusual kid. During his teen years, he developed an interest in historic buildings and was particularly fixated on a World War II Nazi bunker on the edge of his hometown of Arnhem in the Netherlands. He'd visited numerous times during his childhood, and the fascination with bunkers it sparked would never leave him. His other obsession with sci-fi, a genre he felt so connected with that he tried to make his bedroom resemble a futuristic spacecraft, going so far as to modify his bedroom door to open electronically. The name Zante was another result of his science fiction addiction. Once he'd chosen the moniker, he insisted that everyone referred to him by that name, including his parents. In his early 20s, he made it official. Harmon Jones graduated from college in the early 80s, had 2 children with his partner, and created several computer-focused businesses in quick succession. If nothing else, he was ahead of the curve. Zant was convinced that computers were the future, and he felt that the freedom they grant would help shift governmental power back into the hands of the people. To him, few things mattered more than freedom and privacy. It was this, combined with a strange passion for bunkers, that led him to start his bulletproof web hosting business, Cyberbunker. The name wasn't simple branding. In 1995, he purchased a former NATO installation. It had been constructed in the 50s and designed to survive a 20-megaton nuclear blast. a 20,000 square foot, spread over 5 underground floors. There was ample room to build an enterprise. He populated the space with servers and like-minded friends, several of whom were as strange as the man himself. During a period where how the internet should operate was still in flux, Zend wanted to lead the charge. At the time, there was minimal oversight, and that's exactly how the eccentric Dutchman believed it should be. Though even he had some moral fiber, it seemed as cyberbunker rules prohibited terrorist content and explicit imagery of minors. Everything else was fair game, as you'd imagine. This meant that their servers were immediately flooded with adult entertainment. Some of the same energy made it into the bunker itself. In spite of that, the staff found time to grow the business. In 1999, Herman's old friend, Sven Campos, joined the team, also known by his screen name, CB3. Rob Campos was another bizarre character, though with anarchist leanings beyond those of his colleagues. Around the time of his arrival, Sent had opted to rent a part of the bunker to a third party. This arrangement persisted until July 27, 2002, when an explosion rocked the rental space. Sent suffered burns in the resulting fire, but what was discovered in the ashes would have longer-lasting effects. The remnants of a drug lab, supposedly unbeknownst to the cyberbunker crowd, the tenants had been producing ecstasy. There was plausible deniability, so no charges were leveled against Dent, but he was stripped of his business license. This meant that, for a time, he had to move his operation above ground. Days later, Dent made a bold move. He and Campfires declared the independence of their new state, the Republic of Cyberbunker. Their republic comprised of the partially destroyed bunker and its surrounding lands. Set in their apparent distaste for rulers aside, they decided it would be a monarchy. Zante became president and king of Cyberbunker, while Campos was dubbed His Royal Highness Prince Sven Olaf von Cyberbunker. Zen's kingship and Cyberbunker independence seemed to have been tongue-in-cheek for him. His stated motive was a desire to work on projects without outside interference. Campos, on the other hand, was beyond willing to take advantage of his title. To this day, he still uses his diplomatic immunity as a get-out-of-jail-free card whenever possible, and over the years, Cyberbunker clientele would shift further away from legitimate clients and towards criminality. Among its notable clients were WikiLeaks and a low-key file-sharing site known as the Pirate Bay. Its servers were frequently used in other illegal activities as well, including launching mass spam and phishing campaigns. Cyberbunker even facilitated one of history's worst cyber attacks, which was supposedly so impactful that it caused the entire internet to buckle. Legally, a host cannot be held responsible for what its users do, provided they aren't aware of any illegal activity. In effect, this could mean that everyone at Cyberbunker could simply play dumb and stay in the clear. Having grown tired of the scrutiny in the Netherlands, Zent pushed a second bunker in June 2013. Bunker 2 was situated near the town of Traben-Trarbach in Germany, and this time he doubled his security efforts by adding a perimeter fence and guard dogs to keep prying eyes at bay. The first domino fell a year later, back in the Netherlands. There, the Dutch authorities were investigating an illegal marketplace called Cannabis Road. It was hosted on a Cyberbunker server, but one Sen claimed he had leased to another company. This turn of events led him to believe the German police were spying on him and passing information along. Though the servers claimed to be bulletproof, investigators had no trouble finding gaps that Cyberbunker security, with the mains unit having been permitted to monitor Bunker 2's web traffic. They were surprised to see that between 10 and 15% of the data flowing through it was unencrypted. Among that data, they found connections to drug markets, sale of credit card information, and a litany of scams. While the authorities were building a case against him, Zent was shifting gears as the world had changed around him. Bulletproof hosting had steadily become a less sustainable venture for Cyberbunker. When all was said and done, they had an amount of data that was impossible to process. Strangely, Prince Campus was never taken in, which led to speculation that he was the man on the inside. The authorities would downplay his involvement in the crimes that took place in Germany and distance him from the operations of Cyberbunker. In general, the flies in the face of first-hand accounts suggested that he was actually heavily involved, a point bolstered by the presence of a dark web search engine on Cyberbunker servers, CB3 Net4 Darknet, that happened to share the programmer's username. The search engine indexed all manner of illegal content, including the kinds then to refuse to permit. Zent himself believes the gardener was the architect of his downfall. Allegedly, leaked documents do state that he was undercover law enforcement, though we can't vouch for their authenticity. Herman and his cohorts were sentenced on December 13, 2021, having been convicted for aiding and abetting over 250,000 illicit transactions, and being members of a criminal organization. In February of this year, George the Penguin Mitchell was formally declared a prime suspect in the investigation of X-Clue, another encrypted phone network. Campus remains free and is currently running a network in his absence. Zent himself is currently serving 5 years and 9 months in prison time in Germany. The dark web is a double-edged sword, a tool for freedom, and a breeding ground for crime. Its existence forces us to confront the darker side of human nature and the ethical dilemmas of anonymity. While it's easy to demonize the dark web, it's also a reflection of the complexities of our digital age. If you found this journey into the dark web fascinating, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the dark web's benefits outweigh its dangers? Or is it a threat that needs to be eradicated? And before you go, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our next gripping story. Here on CrimeSphere, we're committed to exploring the untold stories and hidden truths that shape our world. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay curious, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.